Well, it is good to be with you this morning, and I appreciate the invitation to look at Isaiah and Isaiah 6 in particular with you. I usually am teaching the young adult singles on Sunday mornings, but they are all out of town, and all the teachers were out of town. So, hey, this worked out really well. We're going to be looking at Isaiah 6. Isaiah, a quick little background here, as you probably already have gotten more than enough. Lance Hawley, did he start this off?
He did.
Yeah, okay, so he gave you a good background. Just by way of reminder. Talking about Isaiah. Isaiah is an 8th century prophet. He preaches primarily to South Judah, and during this time, actually, Isaiah has several different phases in his ministry. Somewhere around before 742, many believe that Isaiah 6 is not Isaiah's call. It could be, but probably not. But rather it comes later in his ministry. Isaiah, the date or the king that's mentioned here in verse 1 of chapter 6. Isaiah has just died. We know Isaiah died in 742, died from leprosy. But strong belief that Isaiah was already in full stride with his ministry prior to this. So this is more of Isaiah's vision of God when he goes to the temple to worship. But if it's his call, then that's just fine, for sure. This is what's referred to as a theophany. Isaiah goes into the temple and into the inner part of the temple, and he sees a vision of God. He's in the Holy of Holies in the temple. So a theophany basically refers to God's manifesting himself to humans. In some way, shape, or form, a manifestation of God. So let me ask you, what are other theophanies? On what other occasions did God show himself to humans? There are a number of times.
Burning bush.
Burning bush, Moses in the burning bush. The visions, okay.
Dreams.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Talking donkey.
Yeah, okay, all right, yes. Unusual places. Mount Sinai, the giving of the Ten Commandments. This is in that category of a vision of Isaiah. So I thought that I would read this, and I'm not sure we'll get through all of Isaiah because I want to focus in on a particular theme that this passage brings up that I believe is really important to discuss. So,
I have a quick question.
Yeah,
for you.
yeah.
Just thought of this morning. He's in the most holy part of the temple.
Yeah.
Wasn't it reserved for the high priest?
Yes.
What's he doing back in there?
Yeah, well, this is an unusual kind of situation. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is where God. This is the place where God reveals Himself to the high priest. Well, Isaiah is there, and interesting that you bring that up, Don, because there's a man by the name of Lawrence Kushner who offers a little interesting tidbit about going into the Holy of Holies with the priest. Once a year, as you know, the high priest went into the Holy of Holies to offer sacrifices and prayers on behalf of the people. And it was such what do I want to say? Just a tremendous, and you go into his presence with fear and trepidation. No one else could go into the Holy of Holies. So what happens, they imagined, what happens if the high priest dies while he's in the Holy of Holies? How do you get him out? Well, Lawrence Kushner says they tied a rope to the leg of the high priest before he went into the Holy of Holies. And then if he happened to die, and we have no record of any high priest dying in the Holy of Holies. Then if he happened to die, you could just kind of reel him out, and not violate the Holy of Holies. So it was really, this was something that was extremely sacred for the Israelites. So verses 1 through 8 is where we're going to camp out. If we get to verses 9 through 13, then we'll deal with that. Verses 1 through 8 is Isaiah's vision of God, and verses 9 through 13 is Isaiah's vision of the people and their hard-heartedness. So let me go ahead and read this, make some comments, and then want to focus, like I said, in on one particular theme. In the year that King Uzziah died, okay, so he dies of leprosy, we know that, 742. After Uzziah is his son Jotham, and then after Jotham is Ahaz. And next week, I think that Lance is going to be here again next week.
I've not heard that.
Okay, anyway, he's going to deal with, because I'd signed up for 7 through 9, but Susan said, no, Lance has already got that. So 7 through 9 is all about Ahaz. So you have Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and then Hezekiah. And Ahaz, during the time of Ahaz, you have the Syro-Ephraimitic War, which is really an interesting kind of scenario going on. You see, who is the dominant power at this time? Who is, I know Lance brought it up, you may not remember. Assyria. Assyria is the dominant power. They had different phases. Early in the 7th century, they were wrestling with problems back home, and so the time in Israel was really a good time, and it was the best of times, you might say. I mean, they were doing really well. And then Assyria asserts themselves once again, and it begins with the Syro-Ephraimitic War. But that's for another time, in a week or two. More than you wanted to know. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Now this is interesting. Hem, it's the train on a wedding dress. Train, and typically, the train on a wedding dress just flows behind the bride. Here, the hem of his robe filled the temple, and from ancient Near Eastern art and relief that we have, the hem and the robe was a tight-fitting skirt. So in other words, the point is, the Lord filled the temple. The Lord filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Seraph is the Hebrew word means to burn. Seraphim is the noun form, fiery one. So you have these fiery creatures who are in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now, stop here just for a moment with the seraphim. In ancient Near Eastern relief, you have these creatures, seraphim, these really try to remember what they had the head of a cobra and the body of an eagle. And when in ancient Near Eastern reliefs, when the Pharaoh was on his throne, the seraphim were around him, and they were there. The seraphim were there to protect Pharaoh, or the Pharaoh. Notice here, who is being protected? The seraphim are having to protect themselves from the Lord. So you see that, this is an awesome kind of, terrifying is the word, a terrifying kind of presence of the King of the universe. So these seraphim are protecting themselves rather than protecting the King. They are protecting themselves from the King of the whole universe. And they're calling out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Maybe stopping right there just for a moment. When you think of the word holy, what do you think of? What's the meaning of this word, holy, in general? Pure, okay. Reverence, okay. All right.
Something set aside.
Something set aside, okay. God is morally pure, and He's more than that. He is separate. He is distinct. He is unique from anything else, and His presence fills the whole earth. The pivots on the thresholds shook, and I'm not sure what pivots are, to be quite honest. But anyway, whatever they are, they're shaking at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. So, talk about a terrifying scene. Wow. That's what we have here. And I said, woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips. Now keep in mind, King Uzziah died from leprosy. He was unclean. And Isaiah is maybe making an analogy here to King Uzziah. He has leprosy. He has unclean lips. And I live among a people of unclean lips, yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So, even though he's unclean, even though he is sinful, he still has beheld the Lord of hosts, the Lord of the universe. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go? Notice us, plural. So it may be the plural of majesty. That is, sometimes in Hebrew, whenever let us make man in our own image, it may be a plural of majesty. It may be talking about the heavenly council. I don't know. But at any rate, especially in this context, it may be more kind of a plural of majesty, just the greatness. Who shall I send and who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. And he said, go and say to the people, and we'll stop right there. We get now into the vision of the people. Okay, here's what I want to, one of the things I want to focus on. There are several things we can focus on, but I'd like to focus on this idea of Isaiah in the temple worshiping this holy, awesome, terrifying God, and just explore that a little bit. And I want to start, so this is Isaiah's worship in the temple. I want to start with Israel's worship. And here's a reminder, because I think that you already have studied this, and it's back in chapter 1. This is God's assessment of Israel's worship. Chapter 1, beginning with verse 10. I'm not going to read it all, but just a part of it, so we pick up what's going on. Chapter 1, verse 10. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Ooh, ouch. That's a pretty rough indictment right there. Listen to the teaching of our God, you people of Gomorrah. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices? So, let me go. What the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams, and the fat of fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls, or of lambs, or of goats. When you come to appear before me, who asks this from your hand? Trample my courts no more. Bring offerings is futile. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and calling of convocation. I cannot endure solemn assemblies with iniquity. Your new moons and your appointed festivals, my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you stretch out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. So this is probably speculation. This is near earlier in the 8th century. Somewhere, I would say, I'm just guessing, somewhere around 750 or so. This is a time when Israel is prospering. They are doing very well. Assyria is back home wrestling with its own problems. They've left Israel alone, and Israel is just gangbusters. In fact, I would say this time period is a lot like the time period today in terms of just of the wealth that people have, and the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. That was the scenario. But they are, and so they are bringing this their offerings to the Lord. They are worshiping the Lord and giving Him for all of these things. And the Lord, well, what's He say? He's had enough. He does not delight in it. It's an abomination to Him. He can't endure it. He hates it. I'm weary from it. I will hide my eyes. I will not listen. Whoa, that's quite an indictment on their worship. And it may be that there's a turning point here, and so things are starting to take a turn for the worse for them. They hear the rumblings of Assyria coming down, and so they decide they're going to negotiate with God. And what do that's what you do. You negotiate with God. Get Him on your side, and He will help you out. And so, it's a foxhole kind of prayer, When the going gets rough, then you go to church. After 9/11, when things get rough, you start going back to church. And it appears to be that's the case, and it despises the Lord. He hates it. In fact, this is kind of the opposite of the cleansing of the temple. Remember the cleansing of the temple in the New Testament in John? Jesus goes in, he sees all of this corruption going on, and he just, turns over all the tables and the furniture in the temple. Well, here it's just the opposite. So you still have all of the furnishings in their worship in the temple, their sacrifices, and everybody is going to church except God. God refuses to enter into the temple because their lifestyle does not match their worship. They are people who can say the right words and pray wonderful prayers and offer wonderful sacrifices, but their lives are immoral and selfish. And God hates their worship because of that. So that's Israel's worship, okay? Now let's turn back to Isaiah's worship in Isaiah chapter 6. Maybe before that, I kind of cut it off here. This is what God really wants back in chapter 1. He says, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove the evil of your doings from before my eyes, cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. That's what they were not doing, and that's what God wanted. That was really for Him a sign that they really honored and respected Him. So now, let's go back to Isaiah chapter 6. And really here, the focus in this first half of the chapter is not on the worshiper. The focus is really not on God. The focus is not on Isaiah, it's on God. The focus is on God in the presence of sinful man and sinful human beings. And it's really a powerful scene, and a terrifying scene, to say the least. So let me stop right there before I go further and ask a question. How is it that you or I would judge a good worship? What is a good public worship? What are the characteristics of a good public worship?
All the songs I like.
All the songs. Okay. All the songs you like.
More songs, less preaching.
More songs, less preaching. All right. All right.
Everybody involved.
Everybody involved. Okay. All right.
Personally, if I get a little tingling on the back of the neck, then,
Okay.
I know I've been moved.
Okay. All right. All right. All right.
Prayer.
Prayer. Okay. Okay. Anyone else? And I think this is, feelings are not bad at all. To have feelings in worship. We don't want to have a downer of a worship. We don't want to be bored. However, I think that sometimes, rather than trying to figure out what pleases me, the question is what pleases God. That's what Isaiah is really looking at here, and what is this is a terrifying scene. But what is more terrifying than to be in the presence of God, in this case, in worship, is for God not to show up for worship. That's even more terrifying. And I think that's something really to keep in mind as we think about the difference between the way Israel is worshiping and the way in which Isaiah is worshiping. I'm not sure this was really, in a lot of ways, a really upbeat worship context for Isaiah. I'm not sure. There is rejoicing as his guilt is taken away from him. His sin is blotted out. But it was pretty rough worship. It was a really rough worship. I'm not sure how well I would have liked that worship. Maybe one of the ways to begin our worship, I'm just throwing out stuff here. I'm just trying to pull some things out here that I understand going on. We're not finished. I want to move to another context in the New Testament here to talk about this, flesh it out a little bit. But now I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something. It'll come back to me in just a minute.
Start worship.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you for starting me. Finding the thought. Maybe we should start worship the way Alcoholics Anonymous begin their sessions. You know how they start their sessions. Hi, my name is Dave, and I am an alcoholic, but by the grace of God, I am a recovering alcoholic. Maybe we should begin our services saying something like, hi, my name is Dave, and I am a sinner, but by the grace of God, I am a recovering sinner. There's some difficult things that really should occur in worship, and I'm not sure how to bring it about, but I think at least we need to be thinking about that and thinking about and not seeing worship as a way of negotiating with God. That's the way in which the Israelites saw it. It was negotiating. They were about to face hard times. Assyria now was coming back to life. And so, whoa, we better get this, this thing going. And so, it's in good American style. What do? You negotiate from a position of power. That's how you negotiate. But that is not what God is looking for. Remember the two people in the temple who came before the temple? You had the Pharisee and the tax collector. And what's the Pharisee say? What does he do? What does he say to God? Remember? Yeah, look at all I've done. Look at all I've done. And the tax collector, what does the tax collector say? Yeah, have mercy on him.
What's the difference between being transformed? I mean, I think that's worship at its best.
Okay.
Is when you're transformed and not by your plan. And I guess what the Pharisee was doing is saying, look what I've done. I've transformed myself into this good person because of all this that I've done. Whereas the tax collector said, transform me because I can't do it.
Excellent.
And, the Israelites were worshiping based on what they've done.
Look what we've done.
Yeah.
Just like the Pharisee. Yeah, exactly.
Several years ago, well, many years now, because I think it's when Jonathan was our worship leader, we had several services of lament, and those were very, very powerful. We lamented different things with each service, but it was very powerful.
Yeah, good. And I'm not sure that, I want to be careful here, I'm not sure that that this passage, Isaiah, it is not the only place that we go to really understand what's taking place in worship. But it is a place to go. It is a place to go. Oh, I was going to read here. Some of you may know Annie Dillard. This is what she says we should do as we come into the presence of God for public worship. She says, we don't come before the living God as cheerful, brainless tourists on a packaged tour of the absolute. That's, uppercase, absolute. Rather, as we enter the assembly, we should all be wearing crash helmets. Instead of flight attendants, I think we need worship attendants who welcome us to worship, and as we enter, issue life preservers and signal flares and warn us. Be sure that you are securely fastened in your body harness before takeoff. If we reach too high in altitude during this worship, oxygen masks will automatically drop from the ceiling. Make sure yours is in place before assisting others around you. We are in the presence of the Holy God, Creator of the universe. And I think sometimes we forget that, and we need a reminder of that. That there's something really special going on here in this assembly, something bigger than ourselves. And yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
I actually did clear my throat. It wasn't to get your attention.
Well, even so, that's
my
just
hand
fine.
did kind of go up. But it wasn't meant like that.
But you always have good thoughts.
Well, do you ever come to worship and we all know we have to repent of things in our life, we're not perfect, and you just feel like it's almost sometimes hard to smile, but then we're there to worship God. So sometimes I'm trying to smile and help other people smile, but people aren't smiling. And then that's making me not want to smile. So then I'm thinking, should I not be smiling? You know, and it's such a small thing, but I feel like we should be listening to the words, especially when people are singing. The words are so beautiful, and we do have some people who do believe that, you know, standing on the promises, you know, I can't say, we should probably stand. I'm one of those. Should we kneel? Well, if we had the kneeling path, that, so I would like that. But we don't, so I don't kneel. But I feel like as a Church of Christ, traditionally, I'm not a clapper. I didn't learn about God as a little Jewish girl became a Christian to clap in church. I was more reserved. So it's kind of weird because, as you can tell, I'm very outgoing, not afraid to say what I think. But in worship, I am a little shy because I don't sing the best. But I'm trying to share with all of you or people that I care about everybody. But you know, there's some you care a little bit more because you know them more. And so we do smile. Like Karen, she smiles at me. I smile at her. I can always count on that. But do you know what I mean? Do you ever feel like you're trying to uplift others, but it's not happening? Or is that just me?
Well, I think you have the right focus. I think that in terms of this.
But because of God.
Yeah,
doing
worship
that.
is not centered on me and what I want. I mean, there are times when I don't like the hymns we sing, or the sermon may not have really touched me, but that's not what it's about. It's about others, it's about the community, and it's ultimately about God's presence. And smiling, I mean, I think that's wonderful, but sometimes, I'm not sure that Isaiah was really smiling all that much, into the presence of God. Smiling is good. Smiling is good, right there, yes. But
it can't be about us, right?
exactly.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'm not smiling anymore.
You just made us smile. Thank you. Okay, I want to move to.
Well, if you need to move on.
No,
that's okay.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, one of the first things I learned in my Psalms classes is that any expression of emotion that you want to find, you'll find the full range of them in the book of Psalms. And worship is a response to whatever God's trying to communicate to us in the moment. And I think that's where the preaching comes in as a compliment to singing. You know, it's the duty of our prophetic voice in the pulpit to bring to our minds, okay, what's appropriate, in what way do we appropriately respond to God this morning? It may be that we need to respond in lament, and it may be that we need to respond in celebration if we're being reminded of the life and grace and joy that we now have because of what God has done in Jesus. So it's okay. We're of an age, we can look back retrospectively and see this whole worship wave.
Oh yeah.
In the 80s, it was all about celebration because we recognized that our worship had kind of been rote and lifeless and regimented, and also in the 80s, we had the praise teams arising, and I thought that was a needed response to the way things have been in the experience of a lot of people, not everywhere. But not every morning not every Sunday morning is necessarily a time to celebrate. I don't think Isaiah was really celebrating a lot here. He was just trying to get out of there alive.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Skin being flayed.
That's exactly right.
And he was in that moment brought to full realization of his sinful life, and I'm in the presence of God, and I can see it. Get me out of here.
Yeah, just a contrast between the holy God and an holy, unholy human being. Thank you. I want to move to Hebrews 12. There are not very many. In fact, I don't know of any other New Testament description of worship other than Hebrews 12. Not by worship, I mean worship here. Now, Revelation, you have worship, but it's heavenly worship. Here is, we're talking about worship within a little house church. Hebrews 12. And there's a contrast between two kinds of worships. And so the first one, now remember, Hebrews and these listeners, these readers, are about to give up on Christianity. They're tired, they're weary. And if you think that having a dull worship and a boring worship is something that only we experience, then you have another thinker coming. Because that's what they felt. They felt their worship was going nowhere. It wasn't doing anything for them. Well, here we go, okay? They're comparing it to things that they had experienced in the past. We had time. I wanted to ask you, 5 till, Don?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask this question before we get here. What is the most exciting worship that you have ever experienced? Let me start off, just kind of prime the pump here. Some of you may know about this. Harding, Camp Dakota? Anybody been to Camp Dakota at all? Okay, all right. They have the final day of camp. They have this awesome worship. They have a ball. Have you experienced it? The ball that comes down from the mountain on a cable in a big pile of wood, and when it hits that pile of wood, it explodes into a big ball of fire. I mean, it is awesome. And the kids love it. One example, okay? Anybody else have that? You know, what's that? That may be a little out of. Okay, that's for kids. What's the?
That's the tingling on the back.
Yeah, okay, right.
That warm fuzz.
Yeah, maybe that ash that just hit on your back too. Okay, what have you been at a place or a time when the worship was just really amazing? When I first went to Harding, I came from a little youth group of about 6, maybe, and I stepped into the auditorium at chapel at Harding, and there were 1,200 at that time singing, and I was blown away. Whoa! I didn't know there were that many Christian youth in the world, and the singing. Somebody else.
Dave, in 2005, Zion National Park, our family, my sister and her family, her sister and her family, went out on a hike to this high point, and we sat down and we sang "We Shall Assemble on the Mountain."
Oh wow!
And
There's that tingle. I got the tingle, Jimmy.
we took communion together, and just it was one of those.
Nice. Couple more. I know you have had them.
I felt that with Don when we were hiking and we worshiped down on the river. Of course, we just crossed the river, which was kind of, we're all lucky.
Was that the picture that I remember? You know.
I think that was a different year.
Okay, all right, go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, I remember that.
Okay.
I remember that. And I remember the communion service from it too.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, I'd like to share more, but I want to move on here. They are really wanting an exciting worship. And so, chapter 12 of Hebrews, verse 18, Hebrews 12, verse 18, this is what they wanted, and he says, this is not what you're getting. You have not come to something that can be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice of whose words made the hearers beg that not another word be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given. If even an animal touches the mountain, it shall be stoned to death. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble in fear. So this is them gathered around Mount Sinai. Well, I mean, wow, can you imagine that worship context? And my goodness, terrifying. Somewhat maybe similar to Isaiah, a little different context. Obviously, they weren't in the temple, but I mean, it was, you had blazing fire and tempests and trumpets and all kinds of sights and sounds and smells. That had to be a real worship. And really, that's what they're wanting. They're wanting something like that because their worship is dull and boring. Then he says this, verse 22. You have come, this is their worship, okay? You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God. You've come into the presence of God. The heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering. So in other words, you are in this little tiny house church and nothing seems to be happening, but your vision of worship is way, way, way too small. Bigger picture. You're in the presence of God. You're in the presence of innumerable angels, the whole host of angels in the heavenly places in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. In other words, you may be in this little house church, but there are other people around the world who are worshiping at the same time you are. And then he says, to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. Spirits of the righteous made perfect. In other words, that cloud of witnesses back in chapter 11. These are people who have died in the faith, and they have been purified. Their righteousness has been purified, and they are worshiping with you. So, Abraham, Isaac, your grandparents, your great-grandparents who are Christians, your family members who are Christians, they are worshiping with you. And, verse 24, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. And we come into Jesus' presence, who has touched our lips, our unclean lips, and made us guilt-free from our sins. Wow. So there are things we cannot see when we come into public worship. There are people and a whole host of images that are present. This is and should be a really exciting worship. Remember, you're too myopic. Look at the bigger picture, and I think that's really important for us, because I don't think that there's any one of us here who hasn't at a time or another felt that worship didn't do much for me. Of course, that's pretty self-centered, isn't it? What's this worship? How can I enable others? How can I encourage others? How can I really believe and honor God in a way? And notice how this chapter ends as he concludes this worship context. Look over at the last verse. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us give thanks by which we offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for indeed our God is a consuming fire. So, we don't leave behind the fear and trepidation of God, but we have a new perspective on that.
I keep thinking about myself.
Uh-huh.
I think about the responsibility we have to worship all the time.
Okay.
And sometimes a little ego gets in the way when we remember someone that compliments us on something we've done before. We like that. And then when we pray to God, we have to face the fact that our memory brings up things that we made mistakes on. I'm not talking about sins now. I'm talking about when we had an opportunity to do something and we didn't do it right. Now we know it's clear. I'm old enough to get back over those things. And when that happens, when you face the fact that all these good things that you remember have to be put in context with the mistakes that God has forgiven, and it humbles us, and that's the kind of worship we need to be involved in all the time.
Excellent.
And when we're prepared that way, then when we come to a public assembly, it's going to be better.
Great. And that was the whole problem with Israel's worship, wasn't it? I mean, they had a gangbuster kind of worship. I mean, talk about really exciting. But the rest of their worship lives were pits. And so, that's how we prepare for public worship.
They were going through the form, but there wasn't any heart in it.
They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me.
Is
That's how I
that,
say it.
is that anything we need to pay attention to here today?
Yeah, good, good. Bruce?
What I like is where Isaiah says, how long? How long am I gonna do this?
Yeah,
And the Lord responds, until there's no more inhabitants, till there's no more people, till
Yeah.
everything's destroyed.
yeah.
He said, that's what I'm calling you to do. You're
Yeah.
supposed to be there. As long as there are people there, you're supposed to be there.
Good. That's the second half of this that we did not get to, sorry. But God, but Isaiah's vision of the people, and that does create some issues there, I know, but, hey, sorry, we're out of time. Don, you want to take over? Okay. Thank you very